And we are live.
Fantastic. Over to me, because I'm delighted to introduce, on this particular format, we call it The Dictators. We came up with this name sometime last year. And of course, now it is becoming more and more apposite to the situation we're in. I am delighted to introduce, like two peas in a pod, the other Jonathan who follows this authoritarian slide. It's Mr. Jonathan Pierce. He will be familiar to some of you. I can't believe that Jonathan and David have not interacted before, but I think you will see that there's a certain amount of alignment in views on what's going on. So
He's
I look
much better
forward to...
looking than I am. That's the main difference.
You are the only human being that has ever said that. So I think in some way, I love you.
Okay. So,
and the youngest of the three as well. I mean, Jonathan's only 23, but he's had a hard life. So
tough paper around.
Yeah. Enough kidding around, gentlemen.
Enough kidding
seriousness
around. We are in a serious place. And just before we hit record, we were talking about the fact that we all would produce 24 hours of material if we could, because there's so much going down. So in an episode like this, it's more a question of, well, what do we prioritize? What do we cover? Because we cannot physically cover anything. So I'd love to know, Jonathan, what your number one is for this conversation. And then David, what you want to cover.
Well, if I can spam slightly, that I will be doing another live that I had planned to do this afternoon, but I had an internet engineer around, and so I've got what will be a much larger expansion of the thoughts that we have today that I've prepared, that has loads of issues to do with going from the geopolitical concerning the United States, Greenland, Venezuela, Europe, UK, down to the domestic in the US with regard to the ICE killing and everything in between, such as the wanting to get rid of mail-in ballots and all these moves that Donald Trump is doing, I think, to move towards authoritarianism in the United States, but from an imperialistic point of view to a control of the domestic population point of view. So, wherever we decide to sit along that spectrum, there is enough content to keep us going for a very long time. But anyway, David, would you like to just introduce yourself to my audience, because I'm co-streaming? I know your audience know who you are, and you're on mute, by the way.
First and foremost, I need to unmute myself. That we had a feedback problem a while back on this, so I'm kind of going back and forth between muting myself. In any event, I'd like folks to know that I also have a channel on YouTube, which I would love folks to go to and hit the subscribe button. It is the No Delusion Zone. Look behind me here. No Delusion Zone at YouTube. Love to have you folks go there and hopefully subscribe. I'm retired from the United States Army, where I was a counterintelligence agent, served in Iraq. Since then, I've been doing analysis, a lot of writing, a lot of speaking, and that brings me to where we are here. I am a reformed, recovering Republican. I actually started out life as a Republican, voted for Reagan twice, and I don't regret any of that, but it almost makes me ashamed that I was associated with this party, this group of traitors and criminals. Really, it makes me ashamed. But I learned my lesson, so that's a little bit of my background. Is
that a good place to start, though, David? Because actually, the other day we had Donald Trump Jr. stand up in, I forget where it was. I think it's a Turning Point USA. Conference where he said this is no longer the Republican Party, this is the MAGA party, and so that's where we're going. So is this a case where republicanism, as we used to understand it, is no longer an edifice of the political building in the United States?
The Republican Party died a long time ago. It certainly was buried on January 20th of this year when Trump was inaugurated. Look, one of the, and we're going to discuss this during the live stream, I believe, one of the main goals of the Republican Party, specifically Project 2025, the blueprint under which Trump and MAGA is operating, was to, in my opinion, to eliminate all political parties. They only want one party, the MAGA party. So yes, the Republican Party is dead. At least the Republican Party that we knew, our fathers and grandfathers and so forth knew, it's gone, it's dead, it's buried. And they want to bury all political parties, just as all dictatorial or authoritarian governments do. They only want their leader and his party. So that's what we're looking at here. Yeah, the Republican Party is gone. And at the outset, I just want to say, we said it off the air. I said it. I'm not surprised at any of this that's going on in America right now. I'm surprised and disgusted that the Democrats and more Americans are not pushing back against what's going on. I'm disheartened as a veteran, combat veteran, that Americans, 50% at least of the American electorate, is accepting what's going on in America right now. It's a stab in the heart to any of us who love this country and those of us that actually fought for this country. That's my biggest concern and my biggest worry.
Is there not an element of sorry, John? Is there not an element though of 1930s Germany where everyone after the war, Second World War, was saying, how did that happen? You had the Milgram experiments, you had the Stanford prison experiments, trying to understand it psychologically. How could good people do terrible things? That kind of issue. But how do you get to moving from a democracy where you vote someone in, like Hitler, who is voted in democratically? I know Ben Chiat, the author Ruth Ben Chiat, has written a book, Strongmen, about how democratically elected people can move to become dictatorial and dictators. And what is happening at the moment is in real time. This is happening far quicker than maybe ever before. And you have a democratically elected leader moving into a dictatorial position, which is exceptionally worrying. And people are unable or unwilling to want to stand up to that for fear of their own futures.
It's happening faster, just to inject there. It's happening faster because Stephen Miller, Bannon, and others have two great sources of information. They have what happened in the 30s, the Russian Revolution, the fascist revolution in Germany. They studied what worked and what didn't in terms of mechanics and techniques. And they also have the Russian playbook of authoritarian slide and state capture that has been built upon, I would say, sort of KGB manuals, but also experimented with in places like Serbia, Hungary, Georgia especially. So they've built a modern authoritarian playbook off the back of, I would say, fascist theology, and not even theology. It's like the manual of how to do authoritarianism. And they're consciously, I think, building a program based on these experiences, doctrines, and manuals.
Well, I have to interject here what you just said, Jonathan. I'm reading as best that I can some of the comments that are coming in, and you have a lot of Trump supporters in your viewership, which is good and bad. But it just still amazes me. And I know a lot of them are not Americans. They're Europeans, they're Brits, of course, maybe the majority of them. But it just
and a few bots, I would have thought as well. A few of them were going to be Russian.
Many bots.
Hi, Olgina.
It still sickens me how, after all this time, and especially now, the last few days and weeks, there are some people who say comments like, when he started becoming a Trump, or saying he's a Trump hater, I tuned out. Why aren't you a Trump hater? Are you insane? Are you a Nazi? Yes, you must be. The other Jonathan, I don't pull my punches, by the way. When people are assholes, I call them that. And if they don't like it, they should tune out and not listen to me. Trump and the MAGA party are Nazis. They're fascists. And if you don't realize that, guess what? You're a Nazi and a fascist. Sorry.
Well, this is the whole thing about the acronym TDS that I often get, accused of having TDS. It's like, honestly, there's such a conversation stopper. It's an inoculation against criticism. It's like, if you don't have a sense that Trump himself is deranged and drunk with power and ego, then and is the wrong person for a democratic future for the United States, then you've got a serious problem, because you're not adequately able to evaluate reality at the moment.
Well, I think there's an interesting...
I have to say this, and there's a lot that disgusts me about Trump, and I'll try not to go overboard. It's not just his lack of knowledge, his illiteracy, his hatred of science and medicine and education. It's his cruelty. It's his almost subhuman adolescent attitude towards the world. Why, again, 50% of the American electorate think this is just fine, that's how we expect our president to be. That's the face we want to show to the world, this arrogant, narcissistic 6-year-old who makes fun of military veterans, disabled veterans, women. racists or other races and religions that carries himself as just a punk, excuse me, and they look up to him and think that's just great. That's my president. That makes me sick.
And there's something kind of interesting here, because if you look at the Russian system, and not just the system, the culture, it's built on humiliation. It's built on the fact that you are not creating a society of upward mobility. You're creating a hierarchy where only people who are prepared to humiliate, abuse, and have a parasitical relationship to those that are beneath you, that's how that functions. And it seems that Trump is trying to import that in. The trouble is there are many people who are either abused or are abusers who seem to react quite well to this. And you're talking a lot of, I think, about these people. Not all of those who are attracted to Trump are abusers. Some of them are abused by the system and feel cut out by the system. But there's a certain characteristic there where they feel like, okay, this is my opportunity to either get one back or to work my way up or to move people out of the way who I perceive have pushed me down into this humiliating position. So unfortunately, it does appeal to certain people. The other challenge I got here, and I'll come to TDS in a minute, because I kind of also think that Trump derangement syndrome, of which I've been accused of over and over, including by quite a few friends who are conservatives, I'm starting to think actually there's something interesting behind that, because if we just focus on Trump as the problem, then we're actually missing the bigger picture. He's too dumb to work all this stuff out. He's too dumb to plan all this stuff out. He is being manipulated. His weaknesses and his own traumas are being manipulated by those around him, but he's far too dumb and disorganized to actually do a lot of the stuff that's going on. So if we get distracted by Trump and all the sort of, shiny bling stuff he does and the chaos, then actually TDS is blinding us to the real, I would say, evil, the systemic evil that is behind him. But I'll leave that there because I want to come back onto this idea of imperialism and American autocracy in a minute. But maybe you can react to that idea that we need to sort of look beyond Trump to what is behind him.
Yeah. So what I just want to talk very quickly about cruelty, because David mentioned cruelty, and there's an excellent episode of The Rest is Politics US with Katty Kay, who's a BBC commentator and on MS Now, and Anthony Scaramucci, who was the comms director for Trump and Trump 1.0 for 11 days. They did an exceptional analysis of everything that's going on, and he talked about how cruelty is not a bug, it's a feature, and actually it is part of the design. So cruelty is an element of what is going on, and that's something that one could talk about at much greater length. But in terms of your question, Jonathan, and this is really important, it's kind of like, and it's the same with Brexit or with any kind of populist movement. It's yeah, we can criticize the movement, but how did we get here? Like, what has led to people to feel that they're disaffected enough to think that this is the way forward? So for Trump 2.0, it's how do we get here, both from a political landscape point of view, from people like Project 2025, the Heritage Foundation, Stephen Miller, Russ Vought, everyone involved behind the scenes. There's Steve Bannon, and then how do we get here from an American electorate point of view, where people are susceptible to this kind of talk, that actually it's attractive? Are they genuinely disaffected? The Rust Belt in America, has that really driven people towards wanting authoritarianism, or is there naturally like a 30% of the population who skew towards authoritarianism if it's their guy anyway? And how, and can they be manipulated no matter whether there's a depressing Rust Belt economic scenario that precipitates that? So yeah, these questions are really, really important.
This is a long-term project, though. This didn't just start with Project 2025. This is a doctoral thesis. This is their PhD work that they've been working on for over 40 years, and there's several books that have been written about that. The fact that this really started actually beyond the 40s, in the early to mid 70s. This started, meaning the Republican Party started to try to both dumb down America and to force this polarization, to resurrect the lost cause, for example, to make the South feel pride again. Racism started raising its ugly head once more. This is a decades-long process. It's not something that just happened. And I've said it before. Why has it exploded right now? 2 words: social media. We didn't have social media except for about 20 years ago. Not really. If we didn't have social media today, we would still have a big problem in America, but it would be the problems we had in the 70s, the 80s, and maybe the 90s. It would be kind of simmering underneath the top, but it wouldn't have exploded now. But we do have social media. So every maniac that can draw breath goes out there. The Nazis, the murderers, the MAGA people, the people who incite violence, the loonies. And we've never had that before. And that's where we're at right now. I don't know. Well, you can't put the genie back into the bottle. But we've got, I don't know what the future holds for us, but social media is making it worse with AI now thrown in.
This is so this is where you start getting a sense that there's a project going on here. I mean, we can talk about Newt Gingrich, we can talk about Tea Party, we can talk about how you get to where we are now, but where we are now is the Republican Party, or whatever you want to call it, has kind of de facto control of the information landscape. So TikTok, the American iteration thereof, is now under control of the Republican Party, if you like, and the Ellison's going to be sitting on the board of that. You've got X and XAI and you know, Grok and Elon Musk there. You've got CBS now bending the knee. You've got CNN in the crosshairs, but you've got Fox News as the mouthpiece for the Republican Party. And when you see Trump getting interviewed by Sean Hannity last night, it's like sickening, the obsequiousness there. And so you're looking all over. You've got Facebook and you've got Jeff Bezos. So you've got Amazon and Amazon Prime. All of these ducks are being lined up by the Republican Party for actual substantial control of the media landscape, both legacy mainstream media and social media. And that is a real problem, because that is your route one towards total control over a society.
Absolutely. And both of you made the points that what's happening right now is the Republican or MAGA party is exploiting, some legitimate grievances that many millions of Americans have in the Rust Belt, Middle America, factory workers, and so forth and so on. They are exploiting those, just as every dictator has done throughout history. Hitler, as you both know, exploited the big lie, the stab in the back, and he turned Germany around. I wrote an article 4 years ago called "The Americans as Germans," basically the good German, which is what I believe MAGA is now. They are the good Germans of World War II. They turn a blind eye to everything that MAGA is doing wrong. Why? Because they are exploiting their grievances. They're getting back at all the people they feel have held them down, legitimately or not. And so we're living through an AI algorithm generated era of hatred, of raw hatred, that the Republicans have exploited much better than the Democrats, who are basically sitting on their hands and allowing this to happen until we get control somehow of social media, not control of it, but somehow stop all of this poison. It's going to get worse.
It's a little unfair, possibly, your attack on Democrats, not to be some. I know Cheryl Waitley in the live chat was saying that, hang on, the Democrats don't have control of either the elements of Congress, and they don't have control effectively of the judiciary. So
no, but they can get out. They've got a bully pulpit. They can get out there and speak to the American people. That's what they're not doing. I'm sorry. So they can go out there every single day, and tell Americans what they need to know.
So to join the dots, though, is what I talked about this maybe a year ago, when it looked like George Soros was going to start buying up, and I don't know if he has done, but talk radio stations. So what you need to do is have control over some of the infrastructure of information. And if I was the Democrats, like, I would be looking at my billionaire elites in the Democrat Party and saying, we freaking need you right now, because at the moment Sinclair owns like huge amount of local media space for like distribution of channels in the United States. You've got talk radio, which is a massive like proponent of the right in the United States, being owned by the right. You've got, as the aforementioned, social media and legacy media channels and whatnot. There needs to be a real project to try and regain some of the information spaces to be able to promote. You're saying they need to be out there with a message. Okay, so you need to A, work on what your message is, and then B, work on how to get your message out there effectively.
Bang on. Agree 100%.
And we have a couple of figures who are potentially interesting. You've got Mark Kelly, you've got Gavin Newsom, who are taking some of the techniques of Republicans and reversing them, and actually doing it in quite a clever way. With Mark Kelly, I mean, this was a great idea to restate the law and get ex-service people to just state some facts, and it seems to have triggered Trump, whereas in the first term maybe he would have just gone, yeah, whatever, and not risen to the bait. This was another point by Scaramucci on one of his podcasts, and I agree with Jonathan. Those are excellent and insightful, but it seems, there has to be more scale, and I reckon they have to be fighting the election as if it's happening now, not just waiting until an election happens, because we've been warning for a while, certainly David and myself on this channel, for the last, well, I checked it, and we started speaking actually months into 2022. So we're this
years, yes.
It's been a ridiculous amount of time, and we were talking about the possibility of authoritarian slide and how you would suspend elections almost since the start. So this is not just a Trump era thing that we've been discussing, but we clearly need people to think in terms of resistance. Just to inject another one here, because I love your views on this. The way Russia gets around this is to say, okay, you've got a shitty life. If you're an average Russian, you got a shitty life. If you're in Moscow, maybe you can get your trotters in the trough and get access to some resources. But the quid pro quo here is that you are part of an imperial project. You are part of something which is feared around the world and which can inflict humiliation on other nations. It seems to me that Trump's playbook is to do this. Everyone's talking about it in almost rational geopolitical terms, but what he's doing is creating performative violence and aggression. Highly performative. It's not really military strategic. Even Venezuela is almost created for the cameras, or a scenario created for an audience of one, which is the orange moron watching the TV screen. But it's highly performative. It's made for TV, and it is made to show humiliation being inflicted on others. My worry here is that if he goes down the full imperial playbook, which is what Russia does, then you can sell that quid pro quo to enough people in your country to say, look, okay, we're not going to do all this, constitution, democracy nonsense anymore, but you will be part of the greatest project in history. We will conquer the world on your behalf, and we will humiliate others to give you a sense of purpose.
It's not a case of conquering the world, though. I mean, I've talked quite often about, you've got two things that seem like they're in opposition. You've got an American isolationism, and yet you've got a territorial expansionism going on here. But they're actually both part of the same thing. I think really the Monroe Doctrine does a lot of heavy lifting these days, which is moving to Greenland, control over South America. $40 billion went to Argentina in order to stop Chinese cash getting into Argentina. They gave 16 F-16s that were going to go to Ukraine to Argentina. The Danish F-16s, the Americans said, you can't give them to Ukraine. They need to go to Argentina because Argentina were going to buy Chinese jets, right? So everything, when you start understanding the Monroe Doctrine, you start understanding why the foreign policy is working like it is. And I think they will make big bids for literally bids for Greenland. And so they've got isolationism, where they're taking themselves out of 61 different international agencies. Trump did yesterday. And you've got, moving away from allies in Europe and just saying, do you know what? Russia can help themselves to Europe. China can help themselves to Asia. We are going to have massive control over the Western Hemisphere. And that will include Canada. And that will include, you had talk yesterday on Sean Hannity of making military strikes on the cartels in Mexico. Like, mark my words, that will happen. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen. And you've got, you've had talk about, from all of the proxies about Colombia, about Cuba, about Venezuela, and now Mexico, Greenland. And of course, Canada is there as well. And so, it is territorial expansion up and down, and isolating from the rest of the world and saying, this is a world that's big enough for a bunch of different empires, but at the moment, this is our empire.
Jonathan Fink, you made a great point about an analogy between what Putin is doing with the Russian people and trying to, gain support there for his military efforts, his imperial conquests now. But the thing I've written and spoken about that I think a lot of people still don't make the connection or even disagree with me is, and I agree with you, Trump is not a great strategist. He's not a strategist at all. He plays to the people's heartstrings, to their emotions, usually negative emotions. But the thing that's very similar to what Trump does, to playing to the American people, and Putin does, is religion. Right now, Trump is playing very much to the Christian nationalists, to the Christians, period. As you know, he's bombed in Nigeria to save the Christians there, to protect them against the Islamists over there. He's making a very, very big deal about he is the king, the protector of Christians worldwide, but especially here in the United States. Putin just made a big speech the other day about how the war in Ukraine is the word of God. He's doing this because God told him to do this. This is a religious war. Nothing more dangerous than a religious war. Trump is using the same playbook, and we have a huge problem with what's known as Christian nationalists here in America who believe just about the same philosophies, religious philosophies and political philosophies as the Russians do, the Russian people, the devotees of the Russian Orthodox Church, led by that other ex-KGB maniac, Kirill. KGB.
For information, David, this is,
go ahead.
This is really fascinating because I see what we're doing as alliance building, and of course we do alienate a lot of people, and that's absolutely fine. But Jonathan and I would say we are two absolutely how would you call it, sort of rabid ideological atheists, but two people who've thought a lot over decades about atheism. I mean, I've
written a dozen books on it,
and Jonathan's written a dozen books on it. From the age of about 14 I was confirmed atheist, but have been thinking it through ever since, over the decades. But one of the most engaging and interesting people that we team up with, do programs with, is a conservative, how would you call it, evangelical pastor called Greg Terry.
He's a Reagan Republican, though, very important.
Reagan Republican, but he's a strong evangelical believer, etc. He's spent a lot of time in Ukraine. And the interesting to me is how much commonality, when we talk about humanity and values, how much commonality we can find, even though we absolutely don't believe in the same thing. We can see good stuff. We can see purity in a certain level of belief when it's rooted in community, when it's rooted in expression of certain things. And I think that's fascinating, building that sort of commonality, because we can spat the stuff and people with the comments can say, oh, you're just a bunch of this or just a bunch of that. But actually we can find common ground to fight for freedom and to actually fight for belief, or the right to belief and expression of that based in community, even though we are both, I would say, rabid atheists.
Yeah, and I think it's very easy to utilize religion for your own ends, and in fact, funnily enough, Vladimir Putin has done that so brilliantly to get hold of, because I don't want to take this down a different route, but I think when you start using, you start trying to play on ideas of traditional values and religiosity, then actually you start trying to get conformity. And once you have conformity in a population, you can manipulate a population far better because they're all very similar. As soon as you have a completely pluralistic population, it's like trying to herd cats, right? So and liberals, in classical like psychology of politics are much more, especially anti-authoritarian liberals, are much more likely to want to undercut, like they will say, authority and rules that are just not their thing, right? And so if you are someone who is a dictator, or you want to be a dictator, you want a more conformist population in order to be able to manipulate them. And so religiosity can play a really, really important role in that.
Well, Trump is drilling down to the Christian nationalists, to the hardcore Christians who believe as he does, and right makes right, who are very, I'm sorry to say, racist, who believe in all of this imperialism and all of this militarism. I mean, one needs only look at some of the photos from January 6th with the wooden crosses, the people carrying the wooden crosses, as well as a gallows and signs to hang Mike Pence. That's not exactly what I believe Jesus taught. But that's a big part of the, not a big part, that's Christian nationalism. And that's who Trump is playing to. It's very, very, very dangerous, but it's getting bigger. It's expanding. They have more control now, the Christian nationalists within MAGA, than ever before.
I think this is an interesting area because we also have to come up with solutions about how we break that communication, because Russia's been quite effective at convincing these people. We can condemn them, but that's not going to bring them on our side. That's not going to get them to pay any attention to Ukraine. I think the big inflection point here is to say, actually, there are people both on the moderate belief side and on the extreme immoderate belief side in the US, but they actually believe, they actually hold values which they some will try to adhere to, and they have a belief system. And if they're in those communities, belief is not optional. They're not masquerading, and they're not saying these things for pure conformity. I mean, some people might be born into these communities and have to do that, but by and large, if they opt to be part of those communities, they do actually believe these things. What we have to convince them of is that in Russia, belief is about conformity, yes, but it's highly performative. Belief is optional. You don't have to believe. You just have to use these, gestures as a way of signaling your conformity. And this is the big lie that Russia is a religious country, that it is a conservative country, that it is based on values and morality. None of these things are true. And I think that's the angle we need to inject into not just, the moderate believers like our friend, Darren Curtis and Craig Terry. We need to somehow engage with the immoderate believers to say, look, you do whatever you want, right? But don't say Russia is your allies in these, because they do not hold, not only do they not hold the values, they are masquerading and manipulating you into thinking they are believing in the same things as you are, and they're not.
Well, Jonathan, you and I have talked a lot in the recent past about town halls, what I call getting out and speaking to people, having the right speaker, having the right messenger to talk to Christian nationalists, to talk to MAGA supporters, to talk to farmers, to talk to Trump voters, Trump supporters, but saying the right message. I believe it or not, even though I'm obviously very upset with what's going on right now, I am not for polarization. I want us to come together. I want solutions to this. I want to try to find solutions to this. And the only way we're going to have solutions is to talk to each other, to speak to each other, to try to find common ground. Period. You can't do anything else short of a civil war. You either have common ground or you start shooting. I would prefer to have common ground and speak to each other. But the thing that's not happening is we're not having the right speakers, the right messengers get out there and do that. I'm sorry, I support the Democrats, believe it or not, but they're sending out really far left people. OAC, as much as I love her, she turns off a lot of people. And she really does.
Actually, I have not heard so much
a lot of the other
recently.
Democratic leaders.
Yeah, I think, Chuck Schumer's been absent without leave. I think Gavin Newsom is the key guy at the moment.
Yes.
He's like a good-looking, right-age kind of person, white guy who will appeal to more to your independence, at least.
He's got great hair.
Although he's pretty divisive on the right. But I want to go back to this idea of like checks and balances and Mark Kelly. So you mentioned Mark Kelly, and there was that whole thing with a video where him and other veterans outlined the existing rules, which is, if you are a serving member of the armed forces, you don't have to follow rules that are illegal, which is is what Pete Hegseth said back in 2016, by the way. And now he's been kind of demoted. He's having his pension stripped stripped back and all this kind of stuff. But by all accounts, the military is not happy with this. The people who are left, who haven't been purged, are not happy within the American military with what, and you could see that from the West Point, was it, where Hegseth and Trump spoke to them. They're all in abject silence, and they'd already been brought from all around the world. But what are the checks and balances? You have three supposedly co-equal branches of the American political system, where you have the executive, Trump and the White House, you've got Congress, and you've got the judiciary. The judiciary is basically 6-3 in favor of Trumpism, and Congress is at the moment, under control of the Republican Party, and the Republicans are spineless in standing up. Although there was the War Powers Act yesterday did get passed through Senate to a degree, so there is an element of people standing up, but these are generally the ones that are going to retire after the midterms. And so you've got the executive, the unified executive theory, as part of the Project 2025 remit of trying to consolidate power into the White House, away from Congress and away from the judiciary. And that is doing very well, thank you very much. He's ruling by fiat. Executive orders are just coming out thick and fast, where he is not going through the congressional route. So what are the checks and balances? The checks and balances should be like military leaders actually standing up in public to support Mark Kelly, but no one's doing that. And so the people that you would want to be standing up to be counted, unfortunately, they're not. And that is probably what happened in 1930s Germany. And I don't want to make too much of a parallel here, but then why not? Because actually, those who don't stand up and to, what is the saying, good people who do nothing, whatever that mantra is, that's what's going on at the moment.
We need to compare this to 1930s Germany, because it's a mirror image. People that don't do that are idiots. I'm sorry. That's why we're in the position we are. People are afraid to compare Trump to Hitler, or to compare the America of right now with 1930s Germany. That's crazy. He talked yesterday or a couple of days ago about canceling the elections. He also said that he doesn't like or care about international law, that he's only going to obey his own morality, which he doesn't have any morals. We literally have the president of the United States saying he's not going to obey international law. He's going to do as he damn well pleases and be guided only by his own morality. And this from an immoral son of a bitch.
Can I just read the part from the New York Times out where so he had apparently a 2-hour interview with the New York Times, which is actually quite unusual. So really very long, and 75% of the time apparently was spent talking about how wonderful the military operation into Venezuela was. And you'll see this an awful lot when they're asked about Venezuela. They'll do a switch to how good the operation was and not tell you what they're actually doing in terms of after the operation and running Venezuela. Anyway, quote, President Trump declared on Wednesday evening that his power as commander-in-chief is constrained only by his, quote, own morality, brushing aside international law, other checks on his ability to use military might to strike, invade, or coerce nations around the world. Asked in a wide-ranging interview with the New York Times if there were any limits on his global powers, Mr. Trump said, quote, yeah, there is one thing, my own morality, my own mind. It's the only thing that can stop me. I don't need international law, he added. I'm not looking to hurt people. And then can I just play a video for you just to give you a sense of international law, and then I'll give the floor back to everyone else. I'll share the screen here if I can play this video to you. Can you add that, because I'm not running this? So Jonathan Fink, can you add that to the screen? Now, this is from Seth Meyers, but I'm not interested in what Seth Meyers says here. It's this montage of people he plays.
When people start saying international law, it's against international law, you know that they have no other recourse, because there really is no international law.
There's no international law that holds us back, because international law is fake.
We live in a world that is governed by strength, that is governed by force, that is governed by power.
Every once in a while, we got to send a bunch of commandos to kick in your door and drag you into a helicopter in the middle of the night in handcuffs. And if that violates international law, well, find someone else to enforce it.
We are the dominant predator, quite frankly, force in the Western Hemisphere.
There is no such thing as international law. It is nonsense. You know what international law really is? Law of the jungle.
There is no such thing as international law. What rules
the world and has ruled humanity is the law of the jungle. We rule the jungle. We are the lion.
I'm sorry, but these guys are the lamest.
Okay. Just as a montage, you can take that down now. As a montage, I think that is really revealing, because not only have you heard Donald Trump say, we don't need international law, I've just got my morality. You've got all of his proxies and all of these media spaces saying, we don't need international law. We have the law of the jungle, and we are the lions. We being Donald Trump. This is essentially international dictatorship and gunboat diplomacy and, the bully reigning supreme. End of. You can take that down now, Jonathan.
Jawohl, mein Führer.
Honestly, though, does that not feel like it?
Well, yeah, that's why it really makes me angry when people say you can't compare Trump to Hitler, and you can't compare current day America to 1930s Germany. Duh, really? Have you ever read anything? Go back to sleep. That's all I can say.
I mean, this was scripted in Germany. Stephen Miller is actually inspired by one of the main ideologues of the Nazi regime, not just the ideologue, the guy who wrote the manual for their takeover and dissolution of rule of law, judiciary, and so on. And this could have been scripted in the Kremlin as well, because this, since 2007, has been Vladimir Putin's aim, which was to deconstruct all obstacles to the expansion of Russian imperialism, influence, lawlessness, and its business model, i.e., take apart NATO, the EU, and all structures of international law, or at least hollow them out from the inside to turn them into zombies that are no longer capable of fulfilling their function. Well, the UN has already become that thing. The UN is an absolute joke, hollowed out, ineffective, controlled largely by authoritarians, including Russia. And now NATO is literally a husk. It's actually more useful for them to keep it going under the pretense that it is still powerful and effective. Some people won't like me quoting this, but J.K. Rowling got this exactly right. There's one bit in the Harry Potter bit where they asked, well, why doesn't Voldemort declare himself Minister of Magic? Because you don't always have to show your hand. If you've hollowed out the institution, sometimes actually it's useful to keep the facade up so that you don't provoke people into taking action. This has been the story of Vladimir Putin's regime for 25 years. It's the kind of Wizard of Oz. It's the guy behind the facade pulling all the levers, but it's convenient to leave the impression of democracy and institutions up. This is what we're seeing in the US, an absolute hollowing out of institutions and the culture of democracy, resistance, and organization against tyranny. But it suits them to keep a facsimile or a husk of these processes going, because it means that people will only mobilize when it's too late.
Illiberal democracy. Jonathan Pierce, I saw a podcast of yours recently, I think maybe yesterday or today, and we would be remiss. We've got to talk about Greenland in the few moments that we've got left. You said, or essentially made a statement drilling down to the real reason why Trump and MAGA want to take over Greenland. And it wasn't really just about the rare earth or the minerals or strategy. Could you talk a little bit about what you said and what you believe is the real reason?
Well, I think there's probably lots of reasons. As with Venezuela, I did a video where I looked at the 9 reasons why Venezuela took place, and you could argue many of these are the same for Greenland. So there's ego, things like ego and legacy. I think I think Trump wants to be one of the very few American presidents who has seen an increase in the territorial size of the American territories, right? So simple things like that, which play to his ego. I think the rare earth minerals are a thing, but they require an awful lot of investment to actually get them, and it is not so easy. Otherwise, they would already be being exploited, and they aren't. And Denmark has offered them previously to the US, and they haven't taken it on. It's just too expensive. but I think part of this is about undoing NATO and having a go at Europe. So Europe becomes the adversary, and what you do by making these moves on Denmark, on Greenland, is you either get Greenland or you don't get Greenland, but either way you have undermined NATO utterly, and then NATO doesn't become a thing, because Trump is at base a transactional thinker where he doesn't understand alliances, or he has no time for alliances, which are win-win scenarios, positive sum games. He is a zero-sum game. My gain is your loss, my loss is your gain. So I see Europe as an adversary, and he's talked about the EU being created in order to bring down the US economically, which is false, but that's what he says and probably what he believes. He sees all allies as potential adversaries. He is a New York real estate mogul becoming an American president and wannabe dictator. And so in real estate in New York, you do not have people that you work with. Everyone is your competitor, and that's how he sees the world.
I saw your podcast, and I absolutely agree. One of the many things that's been said about Trump recently is that he is an agent of Vladimir Putin. Do you believe that there's any truth to that in terms of Greenland, that he's doing Putin's bidding, or it's just as you say, he sees NATO as a competitor? He's never believed in them. He believes that they've been shortchanging us for years. Do you believe that that's the real reason? He just wants to get rid of them, to have them destroy themselves from within? Or do you think this has some ties to the Kremlin?
Well, I'll jump in initially, because I don't know if Jonathan and I have the same views, but I know we slightly diverge on this. I think it's no longer that useful to ask whether Trump is an asset of the Kremlin or an agent, because that distinction is less important than his actions.
Yeah.
His actions actually are to mirror what Vladimir Putin does and to try to impose upon America a business model that is entirely alien to American history. And that is to introduce a land-based, extractive, parasitical, humiliation-based sort of vertical of power, and impose it upon America, which has never been a land-based continental empire. It's been a maritime empire that is built on very different qualities, and is modeled more on the British one, where you need a certain respect for rule of law. You need to add value to raw materials, not just trade raw materials. So he is imposing an alien model, psychological, cultural, political, economic, onto the US. It almost doesn't matter whether he's doing this at the behest of the Kremlin or not. I think he genuinely sees the world in that Putin-esque traditional Russian way, but it is entirely alien to America. That gives me some hope that the US may snap back and realize that this thing is incompatible and reject it like an organ that's been transplanted into its body. At this point, I think he is acting with a Russian worldview. Now, Russian history tells me that they may think they control him, but they may not. And a key point from 1905 to bear in mind is that the first revolution, the 1905 kind of revolution, really kind of kicked off when a protest was fired upon by the Streltsy, I think, which was the Tsar's troops. He wasn't in the Winter Palace, but they panicked and they fired into the crowd. That manifestation was organized by a priest who then turned out to be a Tsarist agent. So often Russia will think it's being clever and manipulative, but it will bring into existence something that turns around and bites it on the arse, quite frankly. And I think we might be seeing this here. They think they've been so clever in degrading the post-war order. They think they've been so clever in helping to bring Trump to power and shape his worldview. This might well turn around and bite them on the arse quite badly when he thinks, do you know what? I've learnt from the master, and now I will become the master. And who's he going to have to knock off their perch first of all? Putin and Russia.
My answer to the question about whether Trump is compromised, or whether it's this, or whether it's that, or whether it's one of the others, or whether he's an agent, or whether he's, so on and so forth, is yes to all of that. All of it's plausible, and unpicking it is really interesting, but I think it's all functionally the same. I think primarily he's a useful idiot that can be manipulated by Russia, and I think that's the easiest way to understand it. There probably is compromat on him, there probably is, etc., etc. But here, can you show just on screen what I got up again, Jonathan? So here's an example. So when you go back to Greenland, so David asked, is Russia involved in this and blah blah blah. So this is a fake letter that was sent to U.S. Senator and Trump foreign policy ally Tom Cotton in 2019. It claimed that Greenland was interested in building mutually beneficial cooperation with the United States and was planning a referendum on independence. Danish intelligence services later said that the letter may have originated from the Russian disinformation apparatus. Shortly afterwards, Trump began talking publicly about Greenland in Trump 1.0. Right, so you can take that down now. So, like, if you remember, I don't know if you remember, but Fiona Hill, when she was interviewed in Congress in a kind of one of these judiciary committee hearings, his impeachment hearing, actually, she talked about how in 2019, there was a swap that was being arranged between Russia and the US, where if the Americans stood back from Ukraine, Russia could have Ukraine. If the Russians stood back from Venezuela, the Americans could have Venezuela. And here we are 6 years later, and it appears that that is insanely plausible. So, whether there's actual agency here, or whether Trump is someone that can be so easily manipulated with these kind of ideas, I think it's functionally the same, is that Trump is just aligned in so many ways with Russia, one way or another. So you can take that down now.
Well, I agree with both of you. I think it really doesn't matter at this point, and I've written about it, whether or not he's actually an agent of Russia because they have compromat on him, which I believe they do, or this is just his style. It amounts to the same thing. He is doing and saying and doing the same things that I believe the Kremlin would ask him to do. So it amounts to the same thing. I think it's just amazing that the chaos theory, where Russia loves to just, make chaos with their adversaries, which they're doing now in Europe very well. Trump seems to adhere to the same thing. MAGA agrees to the same thing, that they're doing so many things at once. Nobody could keep up with it. We can't catch our breath. The media has fallen down a million times. That's exactly what Russia would do. So it's just kind of amazing in a way that if he's not following orders from the Kremlin, that it's just such a coincidence. But again, to both Jonathans, it really doesn't matter because the result is the same.
And then you've got Musk, Thiel, David Sachs. You've got the South African broligarchs, techno-fascists, who are, and that's a technical term, who are wanting this kind of tech authoritarianism as a worldview, and they are getting what they want, and that aligns with all that which is going on at the moment. And then, like, the whole Doge thing that happened is arguably Elon Musk's real objective was to get inside the last place that AI hasn't had access to, that they would very much like access to in terms of data, is all the American governmental data. And Doge getting in there and scraping those different departments, that gives them what they want. So, there's authoritarianism coming in from all sorts of directions, and there are all sorts of big players that need to be understood.
Well, Jonathan, Fink, you said whether or not this is going to, boomerang on them or kick them in the ass. Well, I don't know, but there's a good chance now that we will not have elections this year. I'm not saying it's going to come to pass, but the president of the United States himself said that that's a possibility. With the Supreme Court in his pocket and many, many other federal judges and the entire Justice Department and law enforcement and intelligence apparatus of the United States behind MAGA, if he cancels the elections, who's going to do anything about it? You've got to have the mechanism in order to fight back against this. We don't. Who's going to do it? Who is literally? That's
what I was saying before. Like the checks and balances are being eroded or not able to be brought to play. Goose Springsteen in the live chat has asked with a super chat. Essentially, David, I'd be interested in your answer here. Like, how? Because I talked about this previously. That actually, maybe the US isn't doing things so differently than they've done it previously with regards to, say, Venezuela or Greenland or other places, but they're just saying the quiet part out loud. So they used to, like, Iraq was all about supposedly weapons of mass destruction, but it's really about the oil and contracts, arguably, and the same as it ever was, right? But it's just this time the US is going in and saying it is about the oil, and we're going to nick your oil, and we're going to use that oil to generate loads of cash for America first, baby. And so it's like that. they're forgetting the pretense. They start with drug boats, but they kind of like forget that now. They occasionally reference the fact that, you know, fentanyl, which has nothing to do with Venezuela, cocaine, nothing to do with Venezuela really coming into the US, but they kind of give lip service to that. But really, how much of this is like not actually a policy change? It's just like they're saying it out loud.
Well, I think it's different in that I think it's far more performative.
Yeah.
Whereas you would have had real invasions, if you remember Panama, if you remember, you know, various other things. These are real invasions. These are real attempts at regime change and to alter the balance of power. This really looks much more like a kind of performative mafia coup version. So I'd say they are substantively different from the MO. They're using some of the techniques, but we're seeing something really quite different here in terms of how I think it's going to ladder up. That suggests to me that whether they invade Greenland or not doesn't so much depend on their intent. Their intent is absolutely clear. It's if they think they can get away with it. It's if they think they get no pushback. It's if they think they can bully Europe into giving them something without a confrontation. I think Trump is ultimately a coward, but also he knows that he cannot carry his base forward if there's huge collateral damage. So he's looking for performative and quite surgical brutality. So really the ball is back on our court, and Denmark is doing the right thing by saying, if you try it, we don't care. We're going to shoot you fuckers out of the water and the sky. Be in no doubt. This is the way to deal with Trump. Unfortunately, I think Starmer is exuding absolute weakness and not doing anything to show that he has the backbone to stand up. Plus, he's exuding signals that having preferential trade deals, etc., is the ultimate priority there. So unfortunately, the UK is exuding sort of, you know, lie over and tickle my tummy, or, you know, take me from behind kind of signals.
Yeah, I'm not trying to be a Starmer cheerleader here, but I think
no. I mean, it's about signals to dictators. You know?
Yeah, but I think he's in an impossible situation because there's no security blanket of the EU, right? So if the UK was in the EU now, like you would get. So if you've heard recently, Jean-Noël Barrot from France has been and the German. Was it German president? Who's it?
Yes.
Yeah. So Frank-Walter Steinmeier has just basically said that the US is destroying the new world order. That the EU Parliament has moved to put a halt to the EU-US trade deal. So you can do that in France because you're part of a 500 million person economic trade bloc, right? And you have some heft, and you can just. But the UK is out of both the EU and isn't in the US, right? So if Starmer comes out and says what I think he's thinking, right, then he gets screwed over by the US, and we're not in the EU. So the only option is this is why the Brexit reset deal is on the cards, because I think the UK is now beginning to realize up the top levels that we have no security as a minnow out on our own. But he can't do that without the security of the EU. So I do have some sympathy for his inability to have a backbone.
Signals are important, like the other Jonathan said. And you know what? I agree with you also, Jonathan Pierce. But guess what? We're past that. He needs to say what he needs to say. And I may be wrong. You're not in the EU right now, meaning Britain. I understand that. But if he stood up to Trump the way he should, I believe the other EU countries would at least bail him out partially, not leave Britain just alone if something were to happen. I really do, because they are rethinking their entire security philosophy, their entire relationship with the United States. And I have spoken out like I am now against Europe and the EU and NATO about being cowards, about being too slow. I understand they're coming around now, but it's really a little too late. It's too late. Not too late. It's very late.
I get that, but it's just from a very kind of parochial point of view. Reform are riding much higher than Labour. Nigel Farage's popularity is massively higher than Starmer, and he is Trump's best mate, right? And Reform voters have much more alignment with Trump than other parties, and so there are loads of party political calculations going on here, and I think he's erring on the side of caution. Now, I would love him to be strong and stand up, but but I do understand that would come with it, that would bring with it a massive economic. The trade deal that we're hanging on with the US would be blown out the water, and then there's slap tariffs on us.
They've already destroyed the tech deal. They've already pushed back on the tech deal and slapped in the face after a state visit. So
we would lose Jaguar sales, and or we would lose our Rolls Royce and Bentleys and Aston Martins going to the US, right? So our car industry would be hammered. Honestly, there are things that I'd love Keir Starmer to come up and be really ballsy, but he's got to be thinking as a prime minister of his nation about the jobs, and if he loses those jobs, he loses the next election. So
I'm not sure he understands fully where we're at either. I'm a bit out on a limb here, probably not with you guys, but I think whereas Trump is aligned with Putin and manipulated by Putin, I think it's far more likely that Farage is a systemic asset of Russia. I mean, quite literally an agent of the Russian state.
I think he should be
invested in for several
investigated.
Decades. And there's multiple investigations going on. One of his chief lieutenants was just prosecuted for taking Russian money. I mean, I'm not making any specific allegations here. What I'm saying is it's far more likely and probable that there's some kind of more formal connection there, rather than just it being informal manipulation and networking. That means that if he gets in, Doge, ICE, all of this stuff, even Georgia Dream style Titushki may well be roaming the streets. Now, people are going to be quite shocked here, but I would have to leave the country.
Well, gentlemen, if the EU and NATO and Europe as a whole don't stand up to Donald Trump, it will not end well. But we have to end now this live stream because we're out of time.
And just to put a last little note on there, which we can pick up on the next one, is that Farage would, and he's already come out with it just yesterday, he would withdraw British support from Ukraine. This is crucial because British support is substantial on the ground and in technology terms. This is an extremely dangerous inflection point, and we need to touch upon that, I think, in our next conversation.
Can I just say a big thank you to the live audience, and there have been many people, certainly from my audience, who've been super chatting. Goose Springsteen has asked a bunch of questions that we're obviously not going to be able to answer, but because he's very generously super chatted, I will say to him, I will try and answer those in my upcoming live that will be on this same topic. And also Rick from the Netherlands has asked, and this was maybe the last one for David, I don't know if you can answer this super quickly. We talked about this before. Will there be a civil war? Did the government of Minnesota call the national reserves to get ICE under control? Some channels mention the start of the civil war. Personally, I think it's part of clickbait, but that would point to huge issues in the US. What are your thoughts? So what the likelihood of that?
The Governor Walz of Minnesota did in fact call up it's called the National Guard, but he did not deploy them, meaning they're in their base right now. They're at their gathering point, but they have not been deployed out into the city of Minneapolis. That would create problems. I think they probably will. What I can add to this very quickly, though, is that the feds, the FBI, the Department of Justice in America, has refused to allow the state of Minnesota to investigate the murder of that young woman, Miss Good, which is developing into its own clash. So all of the elements, or many of the elements, of a possible civil war, a state against the federal government type of scenario is developing. I pray that does not happen, but we are closer to a real hot shooting civil war than we have been since 1861 or 1865 when it ended.
Well, there you go.
And so, listen, I also want to thank everyone who's viewed this from all three of our channels. And Jonathan and I, Jonathan Fink at least, are going to be doing this every Friday. And it's called The New Dictators, because we certainly have a lot of new and wannabe dictators to go around and to talk about, and all the corollary issues that have to do with dictators and wannabe dictators. Please look for it. Please tell everybody you know, your colleagues and friends and family, to watch out for it. Again, I would ask that people check out my channel, which is at the No Delusion Zone, No Delusion Zone at YouTube. And please hit the subscribe button. We can all use all the help we can get. The two Jonathans, thank you very much. And if you have anything else to say, let me know. But we're over time, and we'll pick this up next time.
Just thank you to all the super chatters. I really do appreciate you, even if I haven't got to mention you personally.
Thanks, everyone. Take care and stay safe.